Hi, thanks for clicking on this video. We're here at Trinity Wesleyan Church so that we can unleash hope to those around us, and that includes you. So thank you for being a part of what's going on in our church, even through technology. We hope that this video is a blessing to you, and at the end, you're going to see some next steps and ways that you can get involved even after this video is done.
Life isn't the Hallmark Channel. The lights don't always untangle. The plans don't always go smoothly. The family moments aren't always picture perfect. And sometimes the season feels heavier than it looks. But in the middle of the chaos, in the mess, the stress, and the unexpected, God stepped into our world, not perfectly wrapped, but in the most beautifully complicated way. This year, let's find Christ in the chaos. Complicated Christmas.
We are a couple days out from Christmas, and for some reason, it has not felt Christmassy for me. Like, the shopping is done, the decorations have been up for weeks, we've had Christmas parties, the girls' winter ballet recitals are done, I've eaten Little Debbie Christmas trees, I've had Christmas cookies and McDonald's holiday custard pie and white peppermint mochas, I've listened to Christmas music and read the Christmas story of Santa and from the Gospels. I just feel in this weird place, like I know that Christmas is soon, I've done all the Christmas things, but it doesn't feel like Christmas. It's not even the weather. We've had snow. We've had cold. It's not like the nostalgia isn't there. Christmas is here whether I'm ready for it or not. I don't have a bad attitude or anything that's holding me back. It just doesn't feel like Christmas this year. And I was so excited for Christmas to happen and be in the Christmas season, but I just feel almost stoic. Like no reaction. No reaction good, no reaction bad. I'm just present. And it's not like I'm not following God or have drifted from God. It just doesn't feel like Christmas. Maybe I'm growing up and just taking in all the sights and sounds, and I'm not as whimsical or nostalgic as I used to be. In my head, it just feels silent. Anybody else? Now, I hate losing power at our house, but I also love it. I have a love-hate relationship with losing electricity. I hate it because I can't sleep well. The pure silence is just overwhelming. But I also love the silence. Like, you think you've heard silence and then the power goes out and you remember how silent can be? Like, even if you're just sitting with nothing going on, no TV on, no phones out, and you're just sitting in the living room, nothing's going. You're like, it's quiet, but then the power goes out and you're like, okay, that's another level of quiet. Especially if the power goes out with a bunch of snow on the ground, it acts like this natural sound dampener. There's not cars on the streets, there's no heating, air conditioning, refrigeration sounds. Nothing in the house is stirring, not even a mouse. Hopefully there are no mice at your house, not any mice in mine either. You think you hear silence and then the power goes out, like that's a different kind of silence. But there are a couple labs on Earth that have what are called anechoic chambers. Basically, they trap sound and there's no reverb, there's no echo inside. If you went in one of these chambers, you would start to go crazy. The longest time that somebody's ever been in one of these anechoic chambers is 55 minutes. And they turn out the lights and you can't hear anything except you can hear your blood pumping through your body. Like, it's so quiet. It's like negative decibels. Like, it takes away 99% of the decibels in the room. It is so quiet. You can hear your heartbeat. You can hear your eyes blink. You can hear bodily functions happening. Like, it's so quiet. You can hear all these other things. And people start to go crazy and they can start to hallucinate. And that's why there's a limit of how long you can be in these chambers, because you start to hallucinate, seeing things, hearing things. You don't know what's up. You don't know what's down. We're going to go to scripture in a little bit, but I want to give you a little bit of broad context of what's happening before. Usually I'll pinpoint and I'll show you the exact context of what was happening, but this general context is to help us understand the long-awaited words from God. Before we go into John chapter 1, this is the context. Here's the historical understanding. They were basically in a spiritual anechoic chamber. It was silent. They hadn't heard from God. For roughly 400 years, God's people lived in what felt like silence. Not just silence when the power goes out, but silent when you can hear your bodily functions that are impossible to hear. Like, it's that quiet. Spiritually speaking, people are starting to hallucinate and coming up with other ideas and following other gods. And they're like, well, if God is silent, he must not be real. After Malachi, there was no new prophetic word, no fresh, thus saith the Lord, no clarifying voice from heaven. Generations were born, they lived, they died, having never heard a prophet speak for over 400 years. Parents told their children about the old stories of Moses, David, Isaiah, but there was no new chapters being written. And to many people, it felt like God had gone silent. And when God feels silent, people don't stop being spiritual. They just start filling in the gaps themselves. The silence breeds speculation. The speculation breeds fear. The fear bred control. And what God intended as a season of preparation felt like abandonment. And that spiritual vacuum set the stage for everything that follows in those 400 years. In that time period, Israel lived under constant political oppression. They were passed from one empire to another like property. Persian rule gave way to the Greek rule. Fractured into competing dynasties, and eventually Rome crushed them all, claiming dominance. By the time Jesus was born, Rome ruled with an iron fist and wooden crosses. The taxes were crushing, soldiers were everywhere, and violence was a possibility, not a possibility, but a guarantee. Crucifixion wasn't rare. It was a warning if you did something wrong. Rome made examples of rebels and displayed bodies publicly to remind everyone who was in charge. God's people, who once had kings anointed by God, now lived under governors appointed by pagans. This wasn't just political frustration, it was theological confusion. If God was truly king, why were his people always under someone else's control? As foreign powers ruled, the foreign cultures followed. Greek culture didn't just conquer, it invaded identity. Their language, their philosophy, their entertainment, their morality was shaped by Hellenism or the Greek Hellenism views. Some Jews tried to blend in, changing their names, softening their convictions, adapting their faith to survive socially. Others reacted by pulling back completely, becoming rigid. They became suspicious. They became hostile to anyone who didn't look like them. The community fractured between compromise and extremism. Again, the Bible still speaks to today. God's covenant people were having an identity crisis. They were unsure whether faithfulness meant blending in or shutting down. And neither extreme reflected the heart of God. One of the darkest moments in that period came when the temple itself was desecrated. There was a guy by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. He marched into Jerusalem, did what no enemy had dared to do before. He sacrificed a pig on the altar. He erected a statue of Zeus in the holy place and outlawed circumcision, Sabbath observance, and the reading of the Torah. Him sacrificing a pig on the altar, like, you didn't do that. Like, that was the exact opposite, because pigs were unclean animals. You only sacrifice clean animals. And so what this guy was doing is really outlawing and tearing out everything that had God's name on it. People were executed for obeying God. Mothers were killed for circumcising their sons. The very center of worship became the stage for paganism. For people whose identity revolved around the temple, this wasn't just an attack, it was trauma. The place heaven and earth were supposed to meet became unrecognizable. And that desecration from Antiochus, it sparked the Maccabean revolt, which began as righteous resistance but eventually decayed into something darker. It started as faith-driven courage, and it turned into power-driven violence. Jewish factions began killing other Jews. The priesthood, once sacred, became political. Authority became something to seize rather something to steward. And over time, the religious leadership grew wealthy, they grew elite, they grew distant. So by the time Jesus was born, high priests were appointed by Rome, not by God. The positions were bought. Worship became transactional. The sacrifice became a business. The people came seeking mercy, and they left feeling managed. With God silent and leadership corrupt, religious life grew heavy. So in an effort to protect the law, teachers added extra layers upon layers of extra rules. What God gave as a gift became a burden nobody could carry. Nobody could follow all the rules. Faith became exhausting. People lived in constant fear of getting it wrong, of being impure, not measuring up. But the law, it was meant to reveal God's heart. It was used to control behavior and elevate religious leaders. And the people most crushed by it were the poor. It was the sick. It was the sinners, the forgotten. Faith broke into camps. The Pharisees focused on meticulous obedience that often lacked mercy. Sadducees compromised theology to maintain power and deny the resurrection altogether. Essenes withdrew. They convinced everyone else was beyond hope. Zealots burned with rage, ready to kill in God's name. Everyone claimed truth, but no one agreed on love. The unity was gone. Hope was splintered, and into that confusion, expectations of the Messiah became distorted. People longed for a warrior, a conqueror, a king who would crush Rome and restore national pride. They wanted power, not peace. They wanted a throne, not a cross. Economically, the gap between the rich and the poor widened. Taxes flowed upward. The debts trapped families. Widows and orphans were vulnerable. Shepherds were considered unreliable. Sinners were labeled untouchable. You had to stay away from them. Unclean. Many common people believed God was for the elite and against them. They didn't feel chosen. They felt forgotten. Violence became normal. Trauma was inherited. Children were born into fear, into instability, and spiritual fatigue. This is the world Jesus entered. Not a peaceful nativity scene, not moral clarity, not religious health, but silence, oppression, corruption, division, and despair. And it's in that darkness that Scripture says the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. This was about 600 years before Jesus came, from Isaiah chapter 9. And Jesus didn't wait for the darkness to lift. He didn't wait for people to fix it. He came straight into the darkness, into the mess. God didn't send a message. He sent himself. We begin our scripture in John chapter 1. It's the most un-Christmas Christmas story in the Bible. It's about Christmas. Doesn't have to do with the birth of Jesus, though. It doesn't have to do with Jesus born, put in a manger in Bethlehem. All the carols are sung, all that. But it's Christmas to a T. It's like the prequel and the sequel of Jesus at the same time. It skips the birth story because while birth is beautiful, if you think about it too long, it becomes not as beautiful. So we open up to John chapter 1, and the author named John, who would have guessed? But it's not John the Baptist that wrote it, okay? It's John, the one who was a disciple of Jesus. So he skips past the birth story, the diapers, the animal smells, goes right into the theology, the study of God, the study about God. And it's like a thesis statement for the good news of Jesus. And it seems like Matthew said to Luke in the other Gospels, hey, can I copy off you? Yeah, just change it up a little bit so we don't get caught. And John was like, I'll do my own thing. I work better alone. I don't totally trust you guys. None of what I just said is true, so don't take that as truth. All you need to know is that John didn't write an account of Jesus' birth story. 2 other people did. I mean, how many times can you really cover a birth story? 2 is fine. John chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind," pointing back to Isaiah chapter 9. "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John." Now, John the disciple is talking about John the Baptist here. He, John the Baptist, came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. John the Baptist was not Jesus. He was not the Messiah. He came as only a witness to the light. He prepared the way. Verse 9 says, "The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God." Verse 14, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." So the Word is Jesus. Jesus was in the beginning, before the beginning. He's always been hanging out. And then it says the Word, Jesus, became flesh and made his dwelling among us. He became God with us, God incarnate, God, Emmanuel. So after 400 years of silence, opposition, oppression, corruption, confusion, after generations of people wondering if God had forgotten them, and the answer didn't come as a thunderclap or a new prophet standing in the street, it came quietly, unexpectedly, almost unnoticed. And the only way to understand what God was doing in that darkness is to let Scripture interpret the silence. And that's why John doesn't begin his gospel with a manger or shepherds or angels. He goes all the way back before the silence, before the suffering, before the waiting. John pulls back the curtain and shows us what was really happening while heaven seemed quiet. And listen how he begins his gospel. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." John is telling us that before Rome ruled, before empires rose and fell, before the prophets went silent, God was not absent. The Word existed. The Word was active. The Word was alive. And then John says something that would almost sound offensive to people worn down by darkness. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Not shouted from heaven, not delivered through another system or another structure. God stepped into the mess himself. The light didn't wait for the darkness to retreat. The light entered the darkness. And that's important because a lot of people carry this quiet thought deep in their hearts. They don't always say it out loud, but we feel it sometimes. If God is silent, he must not be real. Or maybe more honestly, if God isn't speaking now, maybe he's done with me. And that feeling doesn't come from rebellion. It usually comes after grief or tragedy, after an accident, after a diagnosis, after the prayer didn't get answered the way you begged it to go. Silence has a way of making us question everything we know about God. But the story of John chapter 1, it reframes that silence. The silence between Malachi and Jesus wasn't God stepping away. He was stepping closer. He was preparing. While people thought nothing was happening, God was aligning history. He was aligning language. He was aligning roads and empires and expectations and preparing hearts. While heaven seemed quiet, God was preparing to speak in the loudest way possible by showing up. And that means silence does not equal absence. Waiting does not mean abandonment. Darkness does not mean defeat. Then verse 14 comes in, it says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." Now, this is the tipping point. It's the turning point, the pivot in history. Now, some of you are living in a season right now where life feels upside down. You've been faithful, you've prayed, you've trusted, and it feels like heaven is just like... This passage reminds us that God often does his deepest work where we can't see it yet. The Word was there before the waiting. Jesus was there before the waiting. The Word was there during the silence. Jesus was there during the silence. And the Word stepped into the pain at the right time. And if God was working then, even when it felt like nothing was happening, he's still working now, even when you can't hear him yet. When John says the Word became flesh, made his dwelling among us, he is making one of the most radical claims ever written. First century readers would have been stunned by the phrase became flesh. In the ancient world, especially in Greek thought, flesh was not celebrated. The physical body was often viewed as weak, it was temporary, it was corrupt. Many believe the goal of spirituality was to escape the physical world, not enter it. And so John isn't saying God merely appeared human or visited humanity. He is saying the eternal Word, the divine Logos, the fully entered human existence with all its limitations. Jesus was hungry. He got tired. He went through pain. He was vulnerable. This directly confronts the idea that Jesus was only spiritual or only symbolic or only divine in appearance. He didn't hover near humanity. He stepped into it. John then says the Word, it says, made his dwelling among us. This Greek word John uses, it literally means to build a tent or to tabernacle. It's eskenosin. It's not accidental language. John is intentionally echoing the Old Testament tabernacle, the place where God's presence dwelled with Israel during the wilderness journey. In Exodus, the tabernacle is where heaven and earth overlapped, where God's glory filled the tent and his presence rested among the people. Jewish readers would immediately recognize what John is saying. Jesus is now the new tabernacle. God's presence is no longer confined to a tent, to a building, to a temple. God has made his tent, his tabernacle, into human form. This matters deeply in context. For centuries, Israel believed God's presence was localized. It was first in the tabernacle, then in the temple in Jerusalem. But by Jesus' time, the temple had been politicized, it was commercialized, it was corrupted. And now John declares that God bypassed a broken system entirely. He didn't renovate the temple, he replaced the temple. God's glory no longer is behind the curtains or behind sacrifices. It walks, eats, teaches, touches, heals. As several commentators note, this is not God visiting humanity. This is God relocating his presence. John continues by saying, we have seen his glory. That word glory echoes Exodus when Moses asked to see God's glory and was only allowed a glimpse of God. And now John says, we saw it not in fire or cloud, but in a person. And he defines that glory in a surprising way, not a power or spectacle, but full of grace and truth. In other words, God's glory is not revealed, not through dominance, but through compassion and faithfulness. This would have reshaped expectations entirely. The glory of God looked like mercy. It looked like patience. It looked like love that was embodied. Biblical commentators and scholars often point out that John is making such a pastoral claim as much as a theological one. Because if God truly became flesh and dwelled among us, then God understands human suffering from the inside. He doesn't observe pain from a distance. He knows grief, Jesus wept. He knows injustice. He knows rejection, exhaustion. The incarnation means God is not unfamiliar with human pain. He lived it. So when John says the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, he's saying that God answered centuries of silence not with a message, but with presence. Not with a rule book or adding rules as the religious leaders did, not by pulling humanity upward, but by stepping downward into our broken world. God didn't wait for humans to climb their way to him. He came all the way down to us and he stayed. That's not just doctrine, it's hope.